everybody, it's Christina Marie Weber, and I run a company called Christian Biz Owners on Fire, and we help faith-based and spiritual business owners who want a more profitable, fulfilling and profitable business or ministry while keeping God, their purpose, and their relationships first on a daily basis. So here our process that we do is we get a topic from either someone that's following me, a direct question, a client, something I've observed that I feel really does apply across the board to entrepreneurs. And I create an educational video on that. So today we're going to be talking about how to overcome imposter syndrome. And I'm going to give you 3 steps for overcoming imposter syndrome. So what prompted this video was an interview I saw with Jonathan Romy. I am a big fan of The Chosen, and for those of you that are familiar with that TV series, Jonathan Romy is the actor who plays Jesus. And a little photo here of him. So he basically, in the interview, it was interesting. He talked about a time on the set. This was early in the process. They've done like 5-6 seasons now. When he got so emotional about kind of the awesomeness of, he was portraying, the divine incarnation of Christ. It was kind of an overwhelming feeling of being, not worthy to do that. He actually talked about having to stop the set and talk to the director, Dallas Jenkins, just to kind of regroup. I mean, it just was, emotionally he couldn't do it. And they basically processed it. And basically what the director said to him is, it is a responsibility, but, I'm paraphrasing, but, this is important for people to see. And just that kind of head check really helped him be able to proceed forward. He also kind of talked in another interview when I saw him on where kind of the overwhelmness, where people would see him in public, actor Jonathan Romy, and they would almost feel like it was Jesus Christ. Like people would come up to him and want him to bless them or baptize their children, and he'd have to say, I'm just an actor, I'm not actually even a priest, this kind of thing. Now, he is a devout Catholic, woohoo, and I have heard some interviews where he discussed his faith background, and I did hear the director say, not all of the actors in The Chosen are necessarily, devoutly religious people, but he really wanted to make sure the character that played Jesus was. And from all that I've heard in the interviews, Jonathan Romy is that. So he appears to be a very humble man. But it really made me aware of just a couple of things in terms of the imposter syndrome. The other thing of his story is he's in his 50s. And he was kind of at the end of the rope financially. I mean, he was a struggling actor, and I mean, he talked about being on his last dime, literally, when this opportunity came to him. And so, just going from kind of being on the brink of total ruin financially in your mid-40s to being known across the world because of this series, even that is going to elicit a little bit, potentially, of imposter syndrome, when that rapid rise to fame. But of course, the other thing is the role itself. There is an awesome responsibility. Now, I have noticed he doesn't really talk a lot. He kind of is private about his personal life. You can't really find out much about him. And again, that's almost a respect for the role of that. Like he kind of understands, that whatever his background is, could take away from the image he has as Jesus. I mean, he's not trying to play someone he's not. He's just choosing to not make much of it. He's not openly sharing much about it, which is totally his prerogative to do that. So definitely, I think he's a good example of, I think he's pulling it off, frankly, as far as not getting bogged down by the imposter syndrome. I really love the way he carries himself, talks about it, and one of the things, this is a little spoiler alert, one of the characteristics I see in him is humility, and that is one of kind of the strategies that we'll be talking about later about how to handle that imposter syndrome. But I was thinking about my own story of an imposter syndrome. So I graduated as a marriage and family therapist at the age of 28. So I was doing therapy with children, and I didn't have any kids, so there was a little bit of feeling kind of a little bit inadequate there. Even though I had the professional training, I didn't have the practical training. I was doing couple therapy, and I was a fairly newlywed. I'd been married a couple of years. It wasn't like I'd been married 30 years or whatever. So just those things, I remember feeling a little bit self-conscious, like, who am I to be doing this, and having to kind of work through those feelings. In fact, one of the things I did as a result of that, I had actually really short hair at that time, and part of it is I wanted to look a little older. I didn't want to look like I was someone in my 20s. I wanted it to be, where you couldn't quite tell how old I am. Now, spoiler alert, I'm a lot older than that. Got my hair longer, so it's kind of the reverse way of fooling people with your haircut. So, so I was self-conscious about that. The other thing is, I remember when I first got out of my master's degree, to be able to see clients, I remember having this feeling of, God, there's so much I don't know. I mean, am I really going to see client, and we did have a lot of clinical hours required to get a license and everything. So you're not completely, no experience, but there's a lot of things you don't know about, when you get out of school. And one of the ways that I would cope with that would be that I would compulsively buy books on different things that I felt like I didn't know. Now, a lot of those books went unread because I didn't have the time to read the plethora of books I was getting, but just it was that insecurity of feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. I need to have this book. The other thing, and I'm pretty much an avid learner, but I would sign up for a lot of CEU classes, continuing education classes, workshop. I mean, probably to a little bit of an extreme, but it was really fueled by this feeling like a fraud. Like I really felt like I'm not sure I really, have the experience to do all of this, as well as maybe I should. So, I mean, I had the credentials needed, but I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome. So, same thing when I had my first child. I remember leaving the hospital thinking, you're leaving this child with us? Like, oh my goodness, are we ready for this? So again, we've all had times where we felt inadequate or fake what we're doing from time to time. And other examples, if you're struggling in the background a little bit financially in your business, and you're going out selling how to help other people with their business. I mean, that can make you feel a little bit like a phony. It doesn't mean you are one, but it can certainly play in your mind. So if we don't handle all of those things, those feelings of inadequacy, feeling like you're a fraud, like you're an imposter, it can cause serious problems. One, it can block us from taking needed action towards our vision. If you're feeling that inadequate or that phony, it can be an impediment to the actions you need to take. We can also you can overcompensate for feeling like an imposter by maybe giving people an impression that you're capable of doing more than you actually can. I see that a lot in business, trying to act like you have more experience than you do, or that you can do more than you really can offer. And that can lead to miscommunicated expectations or over expectations, which can lead to unhappy clients. So again, we don't want to overcompensate for this imposter syndrome. The other thing that can happen is just living with that conflict. If you can't resolve that feeling like an imposter, it really is a physical, emotional, and spiritual drain, and it drains us of energy as an entrepreneur, and it can negatively impact your health. So we really do need to deal with this, and it is a common problem, but I'm going to share some ideas with you on how to overcome that. So the first thing is, this is one of the strategies, the first strategy, attend to process versus process skipping. So let me talk about what is process skipping, what is attending to process. So process skipping, and I did a lot of it, and this causes you to have difficulty implementing things, is when you're trying to do a task or have a focus in your life or business that really is more advanced than where you really are. If you think of like if you're entering, I remember when I entered my master's program, we had some prerequisite classes we had to take to even get into the master's program. It's because you needed to have a certain foundational knowledge about stuff to be able to comprehend the level of education at that point. Think of like math. If you certainly need to have a certain level of math skills until you go to the next level, So what happens with process skipping is that that's when you're looking out there and you're thinking, oh, I need to do this. I need to do a YouTube video, or I need to be offering this, or I need to do a challenge, or I need to do hiring people, or I need to do this, or I need to hire this digital marketing company. When you're doing something that, not that it's in of itself a bad thing, but it's not the right thing for you at this point in your business. In fact, you don't have some of the foundational things in place. Just look at the hiring thing. Of course, I made this mistake. Hiring someone when I didn't really even have systems in place. I really didn't have the steady income I needed in place. So it was very stressful because it took time to train the person, plus I was creating the systems as I was doing it, or there really wasn't a clear system. So it was a very cumbersome process, inefficient process. And then I was detracting myself from the sales activities that I really should have been doing. And then the cash flow, it just was the wrong time. It was a good act at the right time. So attending to process is knowing where you are, knowing the next thing that needs to be, goal that needs to be looked at and achieved, and the thing that needs to be fixed. Even though it'd be more sexy to work on something 2 or 3 levels ahead, it really can get you into trouble in your business. Because what happens is you don't pull it off. You invest a bunch of energy in something that was more advanced than where you really are. So that left you not attending to a foundational problem that now is causing you problems, and you really didn't make progress on the thing you were trying to achieve that was beyond your level. So it's really important. So a big way to practice that is I always like to know like different stages of where I am in anything, whether it's in relationships or in my health stages or, in my business. Where am I in the stage of where I want to go, or the full development in that area? Let's be honest, where am I? Not where do I want to be, where am I, and what are the tasks that need to be done there? And make sure I'm prioritizing those things and start cutting out the fat of other things that are really things I need to look at later. Put it on a to-do later list. So that's really important. So that's the first one. Attend to process versus process skipping. Because you get rid of imposter syndrome by having some successes. And when you're doing the latter, when you're focusing ahead than really where you are, you don't make the progress. It kind of feeds the imposter syndrome. You actually prove to yourself that you're not competent as much as you would like, versus tackling a more manageable, age appropriate goal that's smaller, that gains momentum and confidence, and then you start phasing out the feelings of like you don't know what you're doing or things like that. Okay, the second one is create a no comparing zone. So comparing with others is just, there really is very little benefit of it. Now I'll talk about the difference between benchmarking and comparing, but I actually did a little experiment in my early 20s. It was kind of at a low point, and so I was kind of chilling, pulling back, regrouping, and one of the techniques I was using as part of that, I realized that I was doing a lot of comparing myself to others and feeling either superior or coming up short. And what I would do in all areas, but I would also do it like physically, like how I look. So one of the things, so I I instituted a no comparing rule across the board. So whenever I would catch myself comparing to somebody else, I would divert the thought, or, I don't do that now, or blah, blah, blah. And I'll talk about, again, benchmarking versus comparing. But I even did it physically. So when I would go exercise, a lot of times they have, if you take an exercise class, they have mirrors in front to help you look at your form. I would be as firm about, I would not look at other people. I would only look at myself. I used to compare. Oh, how does this person look? How do I look? I would even, when I would walk places, I would almost not make eye contact when I was doing this exercise of any kind. I just was really focused on being in the present moment, not looking at how are people responding to me, reacting to me. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it better than this person? Whatever. I just kind of turned inward into my own little world and just said, you know what? I'm just focusing on where I am right now, what I'm doing right now. I am not comparing anybody else. And what I realized is how freeing that is. It was so freeing. I didn't realize how much of a drag that comparing had been. And let me just clarify the difference between comparing and benchmarking. Benchmarking is a good thing. Benchmarking is when you see someone and you like some aspect of what they're doing, or maybe everything they're doing. What you do is you think, wow, I really am impressed by that. I like that. What are they doing? What is what they're doing that I like that I could incorporate? That's constructive. A lot of times that helps us build our vision, as we know what we really like, what we don't like. And a lot of times we see it in other people. Like, I don't like how busy that person is, or I don't like that they travel that much. I don't really want to do it that much, or I don't like that they aren't, their job requires 10-hour days or 12-hour days. I don't want that. Whatever it is, it just helps us when we can take it and appreciate that that's their choice and what they're doing, and take the good from it and leave the bad, and just clarify what we want and put that into actions. That's constructive. Flat out comparing on a spiritual level gets into envy, it leads to despair, discouragement. These are really primo tools that Satan uses to get us off track. So you'd be surprised how much comparing has to do with generating those things. And the thing I've learned, and that really has been useful to me to kind of get out of the comparing zone, everybody starts at a different place. It does not matter where you start, it matters where you end up. And part of this, from being a professional therapist, kind of being into personal and professional growth for many, many years, what it really did for me, all that did for me, was I realized, you know what? If you have a great family, if you have great genes, if you had a wonderful upbringing, great schools, all that stuff matters. You know what? Versus you had an alcoholic father, you were sexually abused, whatever, whatever your thing is. You know what? It wasn't something person A earned and person B didn't earn, because person A tends to repeat good patterns. It wasn't because they're a rock star or perfect. They just were familiar with things that were positive and healthy. Person B was familiar with things that weren't. It's just a lot harder. So I've really learned that to really understand when people have those kinds of circumstances that kind of have them really be able to thrive much more effortlessly, those are gifts from God. Those are graces from God. Good for them. But there's no need to feel less than if you didn't have that, or you had some other struggles that they didn't have. In fact, the beauty of it is, in God's economy, the people that struggled or had to, because you really have to work through that if you're going to break cycles like that, intergenerational cycles, you have to work so much harder to break through that. You have to take so much more intentionality to do that. That develops virtue that the person that kind of just fell into it and still did good choices and everything didn't have to do. So it's kind of like an economy. You get the crappier deal and you end up, if you handle it right, having greater virtue, and greater skills than the person that had it on a silver platter, which is not their fault either. So it's kind of like a catch-22. So just understand it's just worthless to compare, and it just leads you to keep feeling like an imposter, and you don't get out of that trap. Lastly, live the freedom of authenticity. So I kind of alluded to it here. Authenticity, I did an interview with a gal that's an authenticity coach, and I really loved her definition of this. She said, authenticity isn't that you're doing everything perfect. What it is, or you have everything together. What it is that you know what you value, you're working towards it in every area. That's it. You're working towards it. Some areas you may have accomplished it, other areas you're a work in process. Some you'll backslide. What's not authentic is saying a value is really important to me, and you may even proclaim that to everybody, but your actions and everything else are not consistent with that. In fact, they're very inconsistent. You're not really even making effort to that. That is inauthentic. You should feel like a fraud if you're doing that, because it is fraudulent. It's not accurate. So, part of doing this living authenticity is knowing yourself. Now that sounds easier than it says. Many people are so much chasing shiny objects. They're into constant noise and entertainment and stimulation. They don't even have time to even know themselves, or they're keeping up with the Joneses. They're carrying unresolved personal and family baggage, don't taking the time to work through that. They're comparing with others. They don't have any clue of what they want. It's very difficult to know yourself when you're doing all those things. So you got to clean that clutter out, and you got to simplify to be able to know yourself. And then once you know yourself, be yourself. If you have areas of strength, don't feel ashamed of letting those shine. If you have areas where you're not proud of, you don't need to hide it, but don't feel like you need to go to great lengths to cover things up or try to present an image that's false. Just be yourself, the imperfect self. Everyone on this planet is imperfect. And lastly, live the authenticity cousin, which I alluded to at the very beginning with Jonathan Rumi, is humility. You don't have to be anyone other than who you are. I had a situation where I have a fence that's aging in my back of my property of my office, and just with a couple of storms, because some of the posts were loose, I've had a couple of them fall over. So that happened a couple of years ago, and I had someone fix those for me. And he said, you really need to power spray your fence and stain it. That'll protect it. Well, I didn't do that, and then 2 years later, I had a couple other areas fall down. And it was at a period of time when I was really tight financially. I'd been in the process of making this transition in my business, had some team turnover. I mean, it was just really, really tight. And I did not have the money to fix that. And so I decided, I'm going to learn how to do it myself. But I used to feel really embarrassed I don't want anyone to see that. It makes me look like I'm scraping by, which in some ways I kind of was. And I thought, screw it. I know why I was tight right now. I know that I provide a good service. If someone's going to hold that against me, so be it. I know what I'm doing with the fence. I know my plans. I know why I'm doing it. And, that's okay. I like clients that are humble and real anyway. If that's something that's really going to bother somebody, they're not my client. That's fine. So, it's just about being yourself. Of course, you want to be professional. I did a little interview on authenticity, and I talked about, there's a fine line, of when to share your personal stuff or be, more visible. You don't want to throw out your dirty laundry to people. That's not what we're saying with authenticity or humility. But I talked about the difference between, we want to share things that are vulnerable to a degree, but you want to be careful not to have yourself look at someone that would be a great 12-step group leader, but not necessarily someone they'd want you to help them with their business if you're a business coach. We gotta know the line. But I think it's just much more easy just to be real. And people really appreciate that. I developed my high-end program by being authentic with a client, and I said, he was in the low end program. I said, I really think you're wanting more. I think you're wanting this. I said, I don't have that. And I created a proposal for him to say, if you want to do this, I will develop it for you and let you be my first client. And here's the fee on that. And, I didn't pretend I had it all together. I didn't, I developed it as I went. He really appreciated it. I didn't try to be someone I was not. That's where I was in my business. And it worked out. Worked out for him. It worked out for me. So, to conclude, growing a business and improving your life can be a heavy process if you think you have to look great all the time while you're doing it. When you can find the right zone of just being yourself, doing your best, sincerely striving to offer value to others, being persistent, and correcting the mistakes you make along the way, having a thriving life and flourishing business can still be a lot of fun and effective. So if this resonates with you and you'd like to look at maybe working together, see how I can support you in your business, I am more than welcome to have a conversation with you. Very accessible. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Christina Marie Weber, or Christian Biz Owners on Fire. You can send me a direct message there. You can also go to my website, christianbizownersonfire.com, on the contact page. Send me a message, and in the line, put ready to thrive. I will know what kind of conversation you're wanting to have. So if you'd like to discuss, how I can support you, that would be great. That's how to do it. So have a wonderful day, and you don't have to be perfect. You can just be where you are right now. Just do it in a way that there's no need to live that imposter syndrome. There's just no need for it. So you take care. All right, strike the pose. So let's see here. All right. Okay. All right.